To develop an AQP program does require some resources. There's no getting around it. You can tailor it to each individual fleet. That's the beauty of AQP. Your training program should be robust enough where as the entry-level skills of your customers are changing, then you should be able to adapt.
Most pilots don't understand what career opportunities are available in the world of aviation. They're making career decisions based on advice from friends or posts on internet forums, meaning they are taking huge risks with their livelihood without having all the details. This podcast was created to help you understand the aviation industry so you can find your dream job. Let's get ready for Pushback. Here's your host and my dad, Nick Fialka.
Hey, pilots, welcome back. Here we are. You found Ready for Pushback. It's another interview episode. You know I put out 2 a week. On Monday is an interview episode, and on Thursday, as always, me giving you some motivation with one of my solo episodes. Today's interview comes from a really cool person who reached out to me on the socials. His name is Sam Tomanio, and he is a fascinating man. He's actually a retired pilot. And if you have looked into 121 flying, you know there are 2 different ways that people do training as far as companies go. There's 121 training. 121 training is kind of the traditional process of learning an aircraft, where you learn all of the systems and you start off with going through simulators where they're trying to accomplish a bunch of different things, but there's a lot of leeway for the instructor to grade you. And then you have an oral that's a few hours long where you have to talk about all the different systems and things like that of the aircraft. And then there's AQP. And AQP will dive into all of it, but it uses crew resource management and it uses learning through statistics to create an opportunity and environment for pilots to do their training. Most major airlines do AQP training. Most regional airlines also do AQP training. Some low-cost carriers do, some don't. Some ACMI cargo carriers do, some don't. I'm not going to give it all away. It's such a great conversation. Sam Tomanio is a beautiful speaker and just smarter. He's probably the biggest brain you're going to run into in the next year. I mean, just so smart, knows so much about pilot training. You're going to get a lot out of this. If you know somebody that's going through the process of flight training and they want to get ready for life at an airline, share this episode with them. Reach out, give it to them. I appreciate it a lot. They would appreciate it a lot. And Sam just spits fire, man. He just knows it. So here we go. Sit back, relax. Let's get ready for Pushback. Hey, pilot, did you just get a new conditional job offer? Are you getting out of the military and going to move your family across the country? Are you going to move in base somewhere? Or are you going to go out to find that second home that you've been looking for? Well, I want you to stop right now, pick up the phone, and call Marty and the team at Trident Home Loans. It's an organization that's run by pilots. They understand pilot pay. They understand contracts. They understand military. They have the best VA loans in the United States. Marty and his team have been doing mortgages for years. They've been doing my mortgages for years. I trust him and his team more than any other organization. I challenge you to get a better deal anywhere else. Go ahead, reach out, get a mortgage quote, and then call Marty and his team. They will walk you through the process and show you how competitive their rates are. So go right now, tridenthomeloans.com, and check them out. All right, here we are. Sam Tomanio. Did I say it right?
Yes, you did.
Yes. Hey, man, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Dude, I am so excited that you are here. You reached out to me, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 months ago and said, hey, let's talk about AQP. And you know what? It's really serendipitous because I was getting ready to jump into AQP and do my captain upgrade. And I am really thankful that you reached out. So for the kids at home, will you give us a little bit of background on who you are and what you have done throughout your career? Give us a little snapshot.
Sure. So, I'm a retired American Airlines check airman. I was on the Embraer 190 for about 18 years before I took an early retirement due to COVID back when all that hit in March of 2020. I'm a civilian trained commuter guy through and through, originally from Connecticut. Got my private commercial while I was serving in the Air Force, and I came back to Danbury and finished all my flight training ratings all the way up through CFII, MEI, all that. And I worked as a flight instructor. And I've always had a passion for training. When I was a light airplane instructor, I used to love working with the students and going into the PTS and making sure that we dotted all the T's and crossed all the I's, and all that. Or dotted the I's and crossed the T's, I guess I should say. And so I always really enjoyed it. And I flew 135 charter. Back in the late 70s, early 80s, there wasn't a lot going on.
What were you flying 135 charter?
Yeah, single engine Cessnas.
Okay.
Barons, the Apaches, stuff like that. Or Aztecs, I should say. So in 1983, I got my first commuter job working for a company out of Atlantic City, Bader Field. It was one of the original Allegheny commuters with the U.S. Air System.
Oh.
Time. And about a year after I was there, I upgraded. And then I was offered a position to go into the training department. And I became a Twin Otter check airman, chief flight instructor. And then we had the Dash 7s. I flew the Dash 7. And throughout my career, about 5 furloughs, I've had various different commuter opportunities. After Southern Jersey, I went down to Paradise Island in Florida, helped them with their Dash 7 program, getting that up and running. They were training seaplane pilots to make the transition. That didn't last very long, and then I got hired by Pan Am Express out of Northeast Philadelphia, and that was the original flow-through agreement. When you got hired at Pan Am Express, you actually got a Pan Am World Airways seniority number.
Oh.
That was one of the original true flow-throughs. And about 4 years, they were taking 3 guys a month, and you float over to Pan Am. But of course, in December 91, that went under. TWA bought us, and we became Trans World Express. So I had different commuter jobs. Then I got furloughed again in 94, and I got my first sim instructing opportunity with British Aerospace. And we were train states pilots on the Jetstream out in St. Louis. And then I went to flight safety while I was furloughed, and I ran the Dash 7 program up in Toronto for a year. And then I got hired by Piedmont, which was our wholly owned regional. And it's there that I got the bug for AQP. I got hired, and I got hired to fly the Dash 7, and they got rid of it shortly after I was there. And they said, well, we want you to come down to Charlotte and be a Dash 8 check airman. And Piedmont was one of the first regional airlines to get into AQP. It was 1996 now. And I started looking at the documentation, and I had a light bulb moment. And I said, because of my passion for training, this is going to be the future of aviation training. And I happened to be working on my master's at Embry-Riddle at the time, and I had a few courses left, and I was looking for my final, they call it capstone now. Now, back then it was a graduate research project. So I said, I'm going to do my research in my paper on AQP.
So AQP, it wasn't AQP back before the early 90s.
Well, it was starting. It started in the early 90s. We could talk about the task force in 1987 and the special FAR and all that. It was up and running, but it was in its infancy.
Okay.
For sure.
Okay.
So when I saw that, and I went to my boss and I said, hey, I want to do this research. And he put me in contact with Dr. Doug Farrow, was running the AFS 230 at the time. And I went up to Dulles and I looked at all the documentation, did the literature search, and that's how I got started. And that developed my passion for learning about it.
What's an AFS 230?
Aviation Flight Standards Office. There's different branches. Now, 230 is extinct now. It's now the AFS 280. It's been merged. But back then, it was the principal AQP office.
Okay, got it. So it's an office that the FAA...
Aviation Flight Standards. Let me just mute this.
Aviation Flight Standards. So it's an office within the FAA where they organize kind of all the regulations for standardization of aircraft training.
Yeah, there's different branches in the FAA. And at the time, it was the AFS 230. It was the Advanced Qualification Branch. Because AQP is a safety-related training program, It was merged into the AFS 280, I forgot when, a long time ago. And now it covers ASAP and FOQA and all that stuff because it's all interrelated.
Okay. So if I am a pilot at home, or I want to be a pilot, right? I want to, maybe I'm in the military and I'm working my way through. Maybe I'm in high school and I'm listening to a podcast because I'm awesome. Or maybe even I'm doing my solo and my private pilot and doing all the things that get me to where I want to go because I feel like my dream job is to be a captain in a major airline. I have no idea even what AQP stands for. So can you just lay out let's start with the basics about what AQP is and what is the difference between AQP and the Part 121 training?
Sure. Well, kind of start out in a little bit different direction, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Okay. I want to ask you a trivia question. What's the significance of 1959? Now, I know you were just a gleam in your father's eye back then.
1959. It's when the Ford Ranchero was debuted.
All right. So the beginning of the jet age, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Prior to the jet age, there were an awful lot of human factors accidents in these light airplanes. There's a reason why a flap handle is shaped like a flap and a gear handle's got the little wheel. And there were a lot of accidents. And in 1959, the jet age came about, and we had the DC-8. United had the DC-8, I think, the 707 with Pan Am. And airplanes got a lot more reliable. But what didn't change over the years was the training, the 121 Appendix N and O training. It was that cookie cutter approach where all the training was pretty much the same. It didn't matter what airline you were flying for. Okay. So the catalyst was there were a lot of very significant accidents back then in the 1970s and 80s. The first one comes to mind is Eastern 401, December of 72. Just as a recap, L-1011 JFK to Miami, coming into Miami on an approach, had a landing gear problem, burnt out nose light. All three crew members were totally consumed with trying to fight this problem. They never heard the autopilot warning kick off, and the airplane was a CFIT accident that crashed into the Everglades. And, the controller's looking at this, and he's looking at the altitude going down, and he calls out, Eastern 401, how's it going out there? And he says, well, it's going fine. And, of course, it was too late. They didn't catch it in time. They were all three consumed, and the airplane crashed into the Everglades. And over, a very minor incident like a burnt-out light bulb, 101 people were killed. So sometime later, there was United 173. United 173 was a DC-8 going into Portland, Oregon. Same thing, burnt-out nose gear. And now the flight engineer's back there, and he's watching this go on. Of course, the captain, the first officer, they're up there, they're task loaded, right? The flight engineer is sitting back there, and he's watching the fuel go down. And he's, what we now call, when we teach threat and air management, he's hinting and hoping, trying to get the captain to say, I think we're getting low on fuel, instead of coming around and say, hey, Captain, we've got 12 minutes of fuel. We need to get this thing on the ground. So they flamed out. The airplane crashed, and they lost 10 people. Then, of course, you had Palm 90 in January of 82, Air Florida, snowy day, de-icing situation, taking off. The first officer saying to the captain, hey, Larry, this doesn't look right. And they kept on trucking. And, of course, they didn't have enough power, and they stalled, and they went into the 36th Street Bridge or whatever it is there.
Into the Potomac River.
Yeah. So this kind of got the ball rolling, where people started taking a look. And you had some real industry heavyweights back there, Clayton Fouché, Dr. John Lauber, Robert Heimlich, all these guys that were starting the CRM process. And in 1987, former Administrator T. Allen McCarter organized a focus group in Kansas City, and they started looking at ways to address this issue. And out of that focus group came the Special SFAR, Special Federal Aviation Regulation 58, that launched AQP. And the theory was that we were going to integrate threat and air management, we were going to establish the AFS 230, and we were going to develop training programs based on planned hours as opposed to 121 programmed hours.
Talk to me about that. What program versus planned? Why is that important?
Well, in the 121 Appendix N and O, you had to have X amount of time in ground school, X amount of sim time, where AQP is trained at proficiency. Mm-hmm. And the two significant things I want to talk about with regard to AQP is, I think it was probably one of the smartest moves that the FAA ever did, is they decided to incorporate what's called Instructional Systems Design, or ISD. Instructional Systems Design is a systems approach to developing training. It's used in all types of different domains, started in the military, where you do task analysis, you identify your learning objectives. It's basically whittling down unnecessary content and focusing on what exactly needs to be trained. And the other thing they did was decided to use the scientific method, using empirical data to validate and improve the training program. So what AQP allows, this is a really important concept, is it's a voluntary training program that allows the airlines to go in and develop a training program to their specifications. It replaces the N&O when you develop your qualification standards. So, for instance, under the old system, if you were flying a United 7.4 or a DC-9 at TWA or even a Dash 8 at a commuter, you're doing the same old 121 cookie cutter approach. We've all done those check rides, right? On the ground, takeoff, RNAV departure, steep turns, 3 stalls, back around for a non-precision approach to a mist, back around to a landing. Okay, now the gross weight goes up, the weather goes down. Guess what? Surprise, surprise, it's a V1 cut.
1800 RVR, that's the magic number.
Yeah. You're right. Back around and do your single engine ILS, back around to a landing, rejected takeoff with a fire or something.
I feel like you've been in the training department for a couple days.
40 years. But seriously, and as a result, pilots got very, very good at passing check rides, but not managing what we call nowadays threat and air management and managing those non-normals. You see?
Yeah.
So the thing about AQP is that it allows the individual operators to develop a training program how they see fit based on their operating environment, their culture, type of aircraft they fly. For instance, you have an airplane. Okay, let me use myself as an example. So I was a 190 check airman for about 17 or 18 years. And at American and US Airways, the one before the merger, the 190 was, I'd say probably about 75, 80% the shuttle, Boston, Washington, New York.
Yep.
So in our training program, our LOE, and we'll talk about some of the nomenclature here, was going LaGuardia, Boston, Boston, Philly, a route that we did every day, going in and out of Washington, where we have P-56 avoidance.
Yep. So
we actually had our 190 program and designed exactly what we did on the airplane on the line versus, for instance, the 757. In the wintertime, most of the airlines fly the 757 out to Aspen because of ski season. So we have modules for Aspen. And so you can design, you can tailor, not only can the airline have their own individual program, but within that airline, you can have different simulator evaluations and scenarios on that specific airplane based on the mission of that aircraft.
Let me ask this though, right? So I have flown an Airbus at 2 different airlines. And it is it's a ubiquitous aircraft, the 320. And the way they do AQP is the basic standards are the same, but they have a different functionality when you actually go in and do the events and things like that. Why is it that that's okay, airline to airline, flying the exact same aircraft? You're learning different stuff. Why is that important?
Well, it's based on, what do you mean? What is what important? I'm not quite sure I get
one airline stresses, first off, there's different call outs and things like that. Each airline has individually, and there's this like non-standardized way of flying this airplane where if you have somebody that flies it at Ryanair or somebody that flies it at Frontier or somebody that flies it at American or United or Delta, like everybody's kind of got a different way of doing things.
Yeah.
There's flexibility in that. And then also in the AQP syllabus, they're doing slightly different things. There's, clearly, if we don't fly to Miami, then we don't need to have a sim into Miami or something like that. But there does seem to be some flexibility that the airline has to work within the left and right limits of AQP and still have autonomy to make decisions on how they're going to train here and how they're going to do it there. And that's not super rigid. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, a lot of that depends on the POI. Now, because the POI controls the procedures and each airline has their own procedures and their call outs and their flows and how they want to manage it. So that's more about, again, going back to how the airline wants to set it up. So there are going to be some differences. But, you're still going to have your training footprint, your maneuver validation, your LOE, all your gates. But a lot of that depends on the POI, what type of flows. In American, we were big on flows and call-outs. So that is very individualized. And that goes back to where each individual airline does have that flexibility to design their training program based on how they see fit. And a lot of that is also taken from their FOCA data, their LOSA data, their ASAP data, because that data is funneled in and that's how we build the curriculum. That's why that's a major, major part of developing AQP curriculum is taking all that data source, FOCA data, the ASAP data, line operational audits, all that stuff to factor into it.
Yeah. Tell me about, so since you were there kind of from the start, what have you seen the evolution of this AQP from 121, I'm sure there was probably some resistance. Anytime you want to change something, you're going to face culture barriers and things like that.
Well, yeah, that's it in a nutshell, Nick. I coined the phrase, I use the term the 121 paradigm.
Okay.
They got to remember, most training departments, all training departments prior to AQP were made up of pilots like us, right? And you might have been a FAPE in the Air Force, or you were a civilian guy like me, or a Navy guy, or whatever. And hey, you did really well in training. Hey, you want to be an instructor, and they didn't really have the good basic instruction skills, absolutely. But in terms of AQP, this was so new that the tendency in the beginning was what I call a glorified 121 program. Okay, well, we're gonna do this. All right, people were still calling, an LOE a check ride or a maneuver validation a check ride. So we're going to put lipstick on the pig. We're going to call this a maneuver validation now, and we're going to call this an LOE now. But a lot of the philosophy still carried over from 121. And there was a lot of resistance. I know in the beginning, people say, AQP, that's for, that's for, weak pilots. We don't need AQP. There was a lot of talk, particularly in the cargo industry. I've had a lot of feedback where it wasn't really accepted. You're dumbing down the training program, which is absolutely not the case.
I think you're right. And so here's been my experience. Right now, we live in a world where probably 80 to 85% of the 121 carriers use the AQP model. And would you agree with that's about right?
Well, I'm not exactly sure, but I'd say that's close. Very few airlines are 121 now.
Yeah, the ones that are still are the ACMI carriers. Like, if I get one wrong, guys, apologies. Like, I owe you a beer, but like Kalita and Atlas and Southern and all these other carriers, also Spirit and Frontier, ULCCs that follow that model. And I know that there's an evolution happening where some of them may be going down the path to convert over. First off, I wonder why there's been a long-term resistance, or not even an interest, I guess, in converting over. Maybe it's a money thing. Maybe it's a training capacity thing. Who knows? Do you have any insight on all that?
Timothy P. Pope is a certified financial planner dedicated to guiding professional pilots through smart financial planning. Whether it's saving for retirement, investment management, a seamless military transition, or strategic tax planning, Tim is your trusted financial partner. Also, you can join Tim as he leads engaging discussions on personal finance and strategies for professional pilots on the brand new Pilot Money podcast. Timothy P. Pope, helping professional pilots make the most out of life.
Well, a lot of it is basically just to develop an AQP program does require some resources. There's no getting around it. AQP is integrated into 5 processes, right? It's the initial application, the training system implementation, or the curriculum development, training system implementation, initial operations, and continuing operations. So it's a phased-in process, and it does require some resources. All right. It does require an airline to devote some resources, but the payoff, if they're really interested in improving the quality of training, is huge, but not, as I was kind of alluding to before. Most training department managers or check airmen, they're not versed in instructional systems design or data analytics. And those are some of the specialties that you need to develop a fully functioning, robust AQP program. If I were putting a program together as the manager of AQP, I'd want to have some curriculum specialists, an ISD specialist, a data analyst, and to help develop the program. So that's usually the roadblock. And that's exactly why a lot of AQP programs, I say with no disrespect to any operator, but they really are basically, in my view, a glorified 121 program. We're calling it AQP, we're going through the motions, but we're not doing everything that's allowed for us to do, that's afforded to us to do with a robust AQP program. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do you think that it's more difficult the more fleet types that you have?
Not necessarily, because qualification standards documents, the stuff that you develop are pretty much standard. It's just individual differences with different airplanes. Like, for instance, if you're on a 190 and you're flying the shuttle, then you would focus a lot of your LOEs and scenarios on that type of flying versus if you were on a wide body going across the pond with the nat tracks and stuff like that. So you can tailor it to each individual fleet. That's the beauty of AQP.
You just gave me PTSD when you said nat tracks. So this is interesting. This is really interesting because what I'm hearing is that there's a very important back end of people that you don't see, analysts collecting data, and the sitting in the war room looking at these are the things happening. These are the statistics of what's happening in our fleet. This is where we need to concentrate our training. And those things change. It changes often. And so one evolution of going through the process is not the same as the other as far as the scenario based stuff. It can change up. And that's really interesting that there's a lot of behind the scenes, 10-pound head, like smart stuff going on that the pilot doesn't see.
Can I talk about some examples and give you some concrete?
That's why we're here, man. Let's do it. I got all day.
All right. Let's talk about, first of all, we collect empirical data. And I'm going to give you some scenarios in a second. But that data is de-identified. Now, they still need to know at the end of the day that Nick and Sam passed the ride. But the stuff that goes on behind the scenes as far as repeated maneuvers and what we do in the simulator as far as collecting the data, that is all de-identified, and that gets shipped to the FAA every 30 days. And every year, there's an ERT, Extended Review Team report, where we sit down with the POI, the manager of AQP, all the fleet captains, the principals, and we go over this data. So let me give you a little scenario here to give, sure, specific to the airline. Let's take, for instance, let's say we're doing a training session and we've got a captain and a first officer. The captain is the pilot flying. The first officer is the pilot monitoring. And we're validating a normal ILS approach. Okay. So a lot of airlines are different. We use a 5-point, what we call observation scale. So we're shooting this approach and the captain is the pilot flying and everything is just, they're on all cylinders. They're making all the call outs, glide slope alive, localizer alive, set missed approach altitude, minimums calls, all that stuff. Beautiful. They land. If I was the check airman, I would grade that. My observation would be a 5, which we call error free. This is all involved with our threat and air management model. So same scenario. Let's say this time the captain forgets to call set missed approach altitude at glide slope intercept. Pilot monitoring. First officer says, hey, Captain, hey, Nick, you want the missed approach? Oh, yeah, thanks. Set missed approach altitude. Continue the approach. So now I would observe, was it error-free? No. Was the error trapped by the crew? Yes, we would observe that as a 4. Same scenario. This time, captain forgets to call for the missed approach altitude. The first officer might be talking to the tower at that moment. He doesn't see it. The missed approach altitude never gets set. The airplane lands without incident. Was it error-free? No. Did the crew trap it? No. It continued. I would observe that as a 3. I'll get back to that in a second. Same scenario again. This time doesn't get set, but they have to go around. So now the missed approach altitude is 3,000 and they're leveling off at 2,000. So obviously the error wasn't trapped. The crew didn't trap it and safety was compromised. Okay. The final one is a 1. And that's basically saying that it's an unsatisfactory, which rarely happens. But that's basically saying, what I'm seeing in this sim, there's so many things that are not the standard that we have to go back to the briefing room. And that's when we have a stack of McDonald's applications in the filing cabinet. No, that rarely happens. So let me go back to the 2s and 3s because there's a lot of discretion with the instructor. So in the case of where, let's say the crew forgets to put the missed approach altitude in, there's a real important concept in education called Bloom's taxonomy. Anybody can Google it out there. That talks about the affective domain, the cognitive domain, and psychomotor without getting too much into the weeds. But if I see a crew that they forget to set the missed approach altitude, that is what we could debrief the standard. Okay? Am I going to waste 15 minutes of sim time, putting the guys back out on final, position freeze, resetting up the sim, letting him shoot the approach again? What are the chances are that they're going to forget to call for the missed approach altitude? So in that case, when I would do the grade sheet, I would say, well, we had to repeat that maneuver and it was debriefed to standard. Let's say another example, if we're doing a V1 cut and the pilot, he rotates too slow, he gets about 10, 15 knots below V2, the airplane starts drifting off. That maneuver is not standard. So we need to repeat it. But this time I would put that in the category of a psychomotor skill. He's got to get that muscle memory. So we would debrief it. Hey, how do you think that went? Oh, man, I got off my heading. I know what I did wrong. Well, I'll give them some techniques in my toolbox, and we do it again, and everything is perfect. So we would put that down as we repeated it once because the aircraft was unstable. slower, whatever. So all of that data gets aggregated and we look at it every month. And then when we have our meetings, we say, you know what? The trend analysis is a lot of guys are missing that missed approach call out. And then we can tailor the training and we can make some adjustments, some tweaks into the footprint. I'll give you an example. We had an issue years ago where a lot of people were repeating the rejected takeoff. In AQP parlance, a rejected takeoff was what they call a critical non-current maneuver. You don't do it every day, so it's not current, and it's critical because if you screw it up, you could have adverse effects, right? So what we did is we changed the footprint. We added more RTOs to an extra sim session, and that solved the problem. So all that data that we do with the threat and error management model, the 5-point grading scale, is integral. That's how we integrate CRM or threat and error management into an AQP program. And we go back and we look at it and we tweak the program based on that data.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And it's extra interesting. Just finished it. I just went through the process. And that is so fascinating to me about the back end of things, about how the assessments are going on. I think about my fleet standards captain and his team who is looking at the performance of the pilots going through. And right now, this is a very interesting time as well, especially when you look at United and Delta and kind of American is starting to happen at American right now for these junior captains, these guys and gals that have been less than 2 years in the company. They call them the U3s, I think, at Delta, which is the under 3-year team. And
yeah, I just read. Sorry.
No, so I guess my question, it's more of an observation of here we are. We're probably 18 months into this big muscle movement that hasn't happened in a long, long time. And now we have this data that's coming through and what that's showing. And I wonder what's happening behind those doors.
Well, I'll tell you, I'll give you a couple. First of all, I just read, I think this morning, United is junior manning new hires into the left seat of the 7-3.
Yeah, they sure are. So if you're not familiar with what that means, if you are a new hire at United and you show up on day one, they have captain slots in class. And that doesn't mean you're a captain right away. Here's what it does. It makes you get selected, you get awarded captain, and then you go through the training process as a first officer. You get on the line, you pass your initial observation experience and then the initial operating experience. And then you need 350 hours in the right seat. And then you start getting paid as a captain. And I believe it's once you hit 500 hours, they bring you back through for the captain upgrade. So, but still amazing.
No, that's good. I didn't know that particular granular detail. So let me give you an example. That's a perfect case of why a robust AQP program can pivot to address that training need. Now, I'll give you a specific concrete example, which I'm not particularly proud of, but it happened. We had a flow-through that was negotiated back at U.S. Airways, and we had a lot of the guys coming from the commuters. So you got to remember now, when you're looking at instructional systems design and you're developing training programs, you're doing an audience analysis. You're looking at your customer, your incoming, what they call your entry skills. So you got commuter guys coming in and they're flying military pilots and guys flying CRJ and they're used to VNAV and the MCDU and stuff. Well, when we negotiated the flow through, we had a lot of very senior regional pilots. We had guys coming through that were literally flying a Dash 8 for 30 years. Literally, 62, 63. Oh, yeah. Hey, this is my shot, man. I got 2 more years. I'm going to get to the majors. I'll never be a captain at the time, but I'll retire and, make some good money or whatever. Well, guess what? No disrespect to those pilots, but we had a lot of problems. They never used a VNAV. They weren't used to the speed, and they weren't used to using the MCDU. And it was very, very frustrating to me. And I have to admit, I got very frustrated one day in the briefing room trying to convince some of my peers that, when you've got all these people coming in, we need to make some adjustments to the footprint. And in theory, it's supposed to be very easy. But again, coming back to what we were talking about before, that paradigm effect, that change, now you got to go to the ground school instructors and they're a different union and they got to have their procedures. And it gets really bogged down in the bureaucracy. But what should have happened is we should have focused on those task management skills to help those people be successful. Instead, you're throwing guys in that have never flown above 250, never used a VNAV, never used MCDU, and trying to teach them how to fly a high-performance jet going twice as fast as they're used to. And as a result, we had a lot of training failures.
Yeah, and that's tricky. And so on the other side of that coin right now, we are having young folks coming in that also are not used to the speed, that have been flying, they have to get 1,500 hours. So what are they doing? They're banging it out in the pattern,
flying around in a 172, and then they think they're going to go into LaGuardia and operate,
Yeah, but they, and so it's hard. And first thing I don't want to do is discourage that guy or gal that is driving to the airport right now to get it 172 to bang out these 1,500 hours. Like, it's the bullshit we got to do. But the focus is, how do we set you up for, if we're going to hire you, if I'm going to be in the hiring department at a major airline and I'm going to reach out and pluck you out and hire you, or I'm going to be at a ULCC or wherever I am, then I need to be able to choose people that can be successful at training, because I'm just wasting money if not. And you're a dollar sign, whether you like it or not. As a pilot, you are a dollar sign, and your job is to make more of those dollars for the company.
And that's why someone who is running a department, a manager of AQP, need to understand that you just can't. Years ago, you could take a guy who's been flying for the regional for 4, 5, 6, 7 years. He's got 7, 8, 9,000 hours of CRJ time or 190 time, put him in an Airbus, and he could be fairly successful. The problem that's going on in the industry right now is they're having a captain shortage problem. They're hiring captains off the street. Some people have been out of flying for a while, and then now they're given $100,000 bonuses, and they're saying, "Oh man, now's my chance." I never thought I'd get here. And I know some of the regionals are having some issues with that, with people not being successful. So the bottom line is, and that's the sad part of it is, Nick, that it doesn't have to be that way, because your training program should be robust enough where, as the entry level skills of your customers are changing, that you should be able to adapt and refocus your resources in your training program. You just can't put someone into a high performance airplane and expect them to master VNAV approaches and RNP approaches and MCDU stuff if they've never had any experience with it.
Yeah, you're right. And I received a phone call recently from a person who had gone through who had been out of flying for a very long time and decided to get back into flying for one reason or another, and went to a regional airline and really struggled with getting back into the swing of things. And so I want to caution everybody about what it really takes to do this, and the being honest with yourself, but also knowing the company that you're going down that road with. Because if you're going to marry a company for any period of time, you want to be successful in that training. And because if you're not, it's a big hill to climb to get over that and get past it.
Yeah, and I'd like to address a couple of things about that too. A lot of it depends, Nick, on the training culture of the training department. And I'll tell you a story that to this day, when I think about it, makes my blood pressure go up about 50 points. There was a director of training at an unknown regional that I'll remain nameless, who used to go into the first day of training, and he would say to the trainees, "Look around the classroom. Some of you aren't going to be here in 2 months." And that was some of the attitude. There's a couple other regionals out there that, particularly on the regional side, that had a really, really dismal training record, a high failure rate. I think there was one airline out there, and again, to remain nameless, I mean, they were into the 40, 45 percentile of busted evaluations. So do you mean to tell me that if you hire 100 pilots, 45 of them don't have the cognitive and physical skills to pass the training? Of course not. The big issue, particularly, it's very important with AQP, is to have a highly calibrated instructor evaluator program. Standardization. Instead of having this guy who, going off, and this is what you have in the regionals a lot of times, is each check airman applies the standards differently. Hey, I got my check ride with Nick. Oh man, he's big on the hydraulic system.
Yes. Oh my God.
So make sure you know the hydraulic system when you do your SPV and this type of stuff. And it was a very high failure rate. It's still going on because of the lack of standardization. That's probably the biggest issue that I see facing a lot of these training departments, is having a highly calibrated and standard instructor cadre. When you give an MV or an LOE, it's not teaching the test. It's teaching to a standard. We call them TPOs and SPOs, terminal proficiency objectives, and evaluating to that standard. It's not doing Easter egg hunts. It's not giving guys multiple emergencies. It's going through a footprint, training the standard on all the TPOs, SPOs, and EOs, and then just evaluating them. Okay.
That was a lot of letters.
But
you're right. No. It's true. But all the different requirements that you need to hit for sure. And so I'm just going to, what grinds my gears as I always look at the seniority number of the person that I'm flying with or have an event with, because I know that the less digits in that seniority number, the more technique that I'm going to get from that person.
Technique versus procedure. Oh, God.
Oh, my God. Tech procedures, like all the things. And so, listen, it's so hard because I get it that we can't teach the whole airplane in the amount of time that we have. And there are functionalities, especially within things like FMS and stuff like that, where you get an opportunity to get an observation of the basics of it and the things that are most important. But there are other things that are out there that people have different techniques for that they developed over 30, 40 years on the line. And boy, it is tough because you get in with one, if you're the new guy, if like me, right, you get in to fly, you do this one flight with this one check airman. He tells you how to do this. And then you jump to the next check airman. And that check airman's like, dude, what the hell are you doing? No. This is how you do that thing. And it's just a one thing or another thing. But after a couple flights, that's right. You're right. The standardization of what it takes is so important. And it makes the pilot perform better. It makes you feel better. It makes you more confident. And so that's important.
Yeah, well, I don't know what they do at Delta, but we had what we called Instructor Evaluator Continuing Qualification Program, where we went in and we flew the left seat, the right seat, and the iOS panel.
Oh, yeah.
We did a rotation for RCC. RCQ was different than a CQ is continuing qualification. It's like the 121 version of recurrent. All right. But we rotated and we developed the scenarios and we were highly, highly standard. In a perfect world, if you and I are both check airmen and we're grading based on what I was talking about with the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 scale earlier, we should all be within one standard deviation in statistical terms. Okay. But what happens is a lot of guys, we get off the brief, get out of the brief from, hey, you guys got any questions? Okay, we'll see you next time. And he goes and he grades 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5.
Yeah.
Well, you know damn well that everything wasn't error-free. Okay. So that's always been a little bit of a problem. So we worked really, really hard with Instructor Evaluator, i.e. CQT, and standardization and the grading. And if you had to repeat a maneuver, you had to give the guy a 3, give the guy a 2, guy or gal, give the pilot, whatever. And so that's a really important issue. And that's something that really needs to be focused on.
Hey, pilot, does your pilot uniform make a short flight feel like a transcon slog? Flight uniforms have reinvented aviation shirts with 3D stretch, stain repellents, and no wrinkles. These shirts are just plain comfortable and ready for takeoff right out of your rollerboard. Flight Uniform is trusted by more than 25,000 pilots, and their flagship flight shirt has over 1,500 5-star reviews. I've worn every pilot shirt out there, and if you know me, you know I only wear flight uniforms. Be the envy of every cockpit at flightuniform.com and get a special podcast exclusive discount with the code SpitfirePod20 to take 20% off your first order. That's SpitfirePod20, all one word, for 20% off your first order at flightuniform.com.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And so that's probably part of each company. I would say as it develops more and more and more, it will get better and better. And I encourage those people that have interest in participating in training to go down the path and get to know the people in your standards department, because they're going to be looking very soon. I'd like to kind of take a look at what I just went through. Would you be up for that?
Absolutely. But I want to mention one thing before I forget.
Sure.
For anybody out there that wants to develop an AQP program, or maybe is going to be going through one and just has an interest, more than a passing interest, I'd like to direct their attention to a couple of the documentation that's really important. The first one is the gold standard. It's the Advisory Circular 12054 Alpha. It's the actual advisory circular about AQP that you would go through if you were going to develop a program. It's a little dry, but you can Google it or go to the FAA.gov website. And the other one is the Order 8910, Volume 3, Chapter 21.
Is it 8900-10?
8,900 decimal 10.
Decimal 10.
Yeah, and it's the FAA order that the FAA uses to when they want to review AQP. And it's in Volume 3, Chapter 21, and there's 5 sections. And the first section gives a really nice, it's not as dry as the advisory circular, but it gives a really good overview of what AQP is, how the qualification standards replace N&O, and it gives people a good feel for it. So now, I just wanted to mention that before I forget, because it's really important.
And if I want you to come out and set up my AQP program, it's $700,000.
Well, I do it a little bit cheaper than that.
All right. I mean, yeah, absolutely. That's why we're talking, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is ask my editing team to do an awesome job and dig into the FAA website and get those links and put them in the show notes. That way we can have just a quick hyperlink and you don't have to.
I could send you the PDF file. I have them on my computer. In fact, I have them up right now.
That's awesome.
If it's easy for whatever's easy.
God,
but,
awesome.
Getting back to I know you were making a joke. I'm retired, happily retired. I'm not looking for a full-time job. I will be happy to talk to anybody, no charge, just pilot to pilot, give them some advice, talk to them, give them some of my background. Certainly I'd be willing to fly out somewhere and talk to someone. But if somebody's really struggling or they just want to say, you know what, how did we do it at US Airways or American? I'd be more than happy to help anybody who calls me or contacts me. But anyway.
No, I'm actually really, really thankful. There are a lot of executives from the airlines listen to this show, and I'm very thankful, first off, for them, and second off, for you, because when you called me, I was just so blown away because we lose so much tribal knowledge with the massive retirements, and you were swept up in that just because of how life is, right?
Yeah.
I'm thankful there's so much other knowledge that has just, we're losing fast, and capturing this is so important to me. So thank you.
Well, thank you. It's a passion of mine. Training has been a passion of mine. I've lived it. I'm really passionate about AQP. And I did an episode with the boys on 21.5 there a few years ago.
That's right.
And then when I heard you on recently and you mentioned a mutual friend of ours, I said, well, I thought maybe I love your program. I listened to every episode. I love your little daughter there giving the intro. I think it spoke to you. And I said, well, I'd like maybe I could add some value to your program and help some people. So that's why I reached out to you.
Yeah. The guy he's talking about is this guy. I'm going to call him out. His name's Jim Crawford. And he is the guy that gave me my very first flight. He had a pit special and we were at Hickory Regional Airport. And oh my gosh, I was 14 years old. I still have a photo from standing on the wing. And man, it just started everything. And so big thanks to my good friend, Jim Crawford.
When I was a new hire, I was his FO on the Airbus, and I actually helped him when he started his flight school here in North Carolina with some paperwork back 20 years ago. But yeah, good guy.
I never thought ever in my whole life that I would meet another person that knew Jim, because I've just been Navy and moved around all the time.
I used to call him Captain Avocado because he's a California boy.
Yeah, he is.
He'll love that when I do it.
Listen, his family are the coolest people you'll ever meet. Golly.
Yeah. Your situation.
Let's talk about me. I just kind of want to pace through, and because if you've made it this far into the show and you are not currently flying with a carrier that does AQP training, I want to give you an idea of what it looks like. Sam and I have talked about a lot of different aspects of it because I know it. I've done it for 6 years now, and he's done it for a couple more than 6 years. And so this has been my experience. I'm sure that I'm going to say things incorrectly, and Sam will be able to give us kind of insight into why we're doing it, what the purpose was. I remember the first thing we did was we got a ton of PowerPoints to go through of LMS training, learning management system. So they dumped all the system.
You're talking about CBT, computer-based training.
Computer-based training. Yeah. And there was a lot of it. It took hours and hours and hours. And you had to go through and learn about the engine, each system, engines, hydraulics, fire protection, like all those different things.
You still got to do that. Still has to be done.
Yep. And so once all that's done, you have to have all that done before you even step first day to get towards the simulators. And then our first thing we did is we had to take a test. And it was a big daddy test. And it was all based off of documents. We call it the Volume 1 and the Volume 2. And it's all the information about, it looks back and asks you, the hydraulic pressure and this, or System 2 controls these things. And it was an open book test when I took it. And it took, it took like 3 hours. That was your systems validation. Is that the right term for it?
Systems validation or SPV, system procedures validation, each airline does it a little differently. But that was your actual value. It was open book?
It was open book.
Systems validation, okay.
Yep. It took forever. It was a really, really long process. And then it was all automated on these ancient computers, and that's just kind of how it goes. From there, we jumped into the basic simulators where you're not in a real full motion sim.
Flight training device.
A flight training device. And if you've never seen one of these things, it's all the switches.
Everything except motion and visual.
That's right. Everything except motion and visual. And depending on the newness of your airplane, it may be really great or it may be really laggy and slow and noisy. So, I did one in the 320, which was amazing. And I did another one in the 757, which felt like I could be smoking cigarettes in the aircraft. Like it was so old, but it was different. And so at that point, that's the first segment where you're really sitting with another pilot, whether it's somebody's playing first officer and somebody's playing captain. And you have an instructor behind you, and the first one's like all hand holding, just doing starting the aircraft, like walking into the aircraft before you even sit down.
The building block approach. Boy,
it's building blocks. I mean, you're 15 minutes before you even sit down in the seat to turn on the battery. Mm-hmm. And then you're walking through all of the different flows to get the airplane started. And you build on the first day is just getting the plane started and shutting the plane down. And that takes 4 hours. It is so long, but it's amazing information. And if you're going through this, you have to have a notebook. You have to have a notebook and write down each sim, because you're going to get, this is where all of the not tribal knowledge, all of the important functionalities of the plane, what the flow is. Does it follow a shape? Is it a letter? Is it an acronym? You want to write those things down because you're going to lose it. And that's really important because everybody has these great little mnemonics to help you remember stuff. Once you learn how to shut the plane down and turn it off, you start, you do a takeoff, you do an ILS, you do climbs and descents and those kind of things. And it's really interesting. And at the end of that, for my company, you have, I called it a check ride, but would you call it a progress check, or what was the...
You're talking about in the ground school?
Yes, sir.
Systems and procedures validation. You're talking about the actual sim.
Yeah, no. So in the first segment, they have to validate that you know all your flows and know all your procedures.
It's equivalent to an oral under 121. It's systems and procedures validation or however they phrase it.
Yeah. And so you would do that. You'd have a senior, it may have been a check airman, may not, but you just get signed off saying, hey, you're good to go to that. And that's when you start moving into the next segment, which is full motion sims, which is very, very fun. And that's the maneuvers portion. And it's repetition, right? But it's repetition with focuses on things like upset training and high altitude training or cold weather operations.
ET stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, how many sims did you have before you did your MV? Like 1 through 4 and then an MV, or?
I think it was 1 through 4. So you had 4 shots of learning how to do the maneuvers, and then you had your maneuver validation, which was very much, it was rigidly set.
As it should be.
Yeah. And so, you take off, you do a lap in the pattern, you do an ILS, you do maybe an RNAV approach, maybe you do a go around or two, maybe you do a full stop landing, then you have, it's V1 cuts.
No flat, slat, V1
nope.
cut, RTO, right?
That's right. He's got it. You certainly feel the pressure as a student going through there in the maneuvers validation, because you really want to do well. And, if you've never been, it doesn't matter if you're an F-35 driver or if you're a Cessna driver, you have an inordinate amount of pressure on your shoulders that you are putting on there to perform. So
I want to talk about the MV because the maneuver validation is not a check ride.
Correct.
It is not a check ride. It is a validation of the airline's training program vis-a-vis the train to proficiency concept. You can repeat. I don't know what Delta's rules are, but you can repeat a maneuver. You can usually, it's basically 3 strikes, and then we say, okay, we need to talk about this. But if you do a V1 cut and it's not to standard, we can do it over. If you do an approach and it's not to standard, we can do it over, So it's not a check ride in the sense of a PC where, in theory, if one thing is out of standard, then it's unsatisfactory.
Yeah, I think I messed up. I think I messed up the single engine go around on my captain upgrade, so we repeated that. He said, they bring you back out to 3 miles or something. They make you come down and you practice, you do it again, and you just refocus. And tell you what, to be successful with that, you have to let the past be in the past, and you cannot dive down on.
You got to shake it off. And it's easier said than done. I know that. I've been there. We've all been there. It's easier said than done. Overall, did you feel a lot of pressure like you were taking a 121 program if you go back to your 121 days? Or was it, because it shouldn't be, it doesn't have to be. I know it is.
I tell you what, it's the instructor that sets the tone.
Absolutely correct.
And I had, in my 300 series, I had this guy named Shane as my, who did the check, or did the validation, and he was amazing. And he set the tone early. And from that, I felt comfortable. I felt like, he's like, hey man, this is going to be so good. You're going to go in. Here's the things we're going to cover. I know you can do this. I have faith in you. Like, let's just make this happen. And I felt so good. He was human to me. And I love that. And that's so important. Fast forward to my 400 series. And the 400 series, the last part, the LOE, the line operations portion, you basically start at an airport. You're in a cold, dark aircraft. You start it up. You taxi out. You take off. You fly to the next destination and you land. And maybe there's some kind of non-normal that they put in there. Hey, you got a generator light. Hey, there's a bleed light.
Yeah, exactly.
And it teaches you to manage how to manage these non-normals, whether you're a first officer or whether you're a captain, whether you're the pilot flying, whether you're a pilot monitoring. And how are you going to do that? Because they put it all together in this little capstone event at the end, which is your LOE, which is the last of the last thing. And for me, to be honest with everybody, I actually got extra training before I was not recommended for my check ride the first time. And that was, basically due to some not being proficient at managing the panel on the aircraft. And I needed some more focus on it. And I'm really glad that I got it, because I felt, when I got the extra training, man, I felt awful. But once I was able to understand it, and I got an instructor that was just able to peel back the scales on my eyes, it was awesome. And that was probably the most valuable bit of training I ever got. I think that is, as you go through, when you do get extra training, being able to focus yourself and know that you can still pass is very important. The guy that did my check ride, the final LOE, the final event for that last period before I went to the line, he brought a lot of intensity with him. He was not the same guy as old Shane from before. And I was very nervous. I was super tense. And I just I felt like the whole world, my whole family's world depended on me passing this thing. And that was a big deal. So I had an inordinate amount of pressure on me. And I think that if the tone was set differently, it probably wouldn't have been. I did pass, and I did, I feel like I did a pretty good job, but man, gosh, was I stressed out, and that was hard. So to all the instructors out there, man, set the tone, be cool.
I hate to hear that. And it's certainly true, and it happens. And that's one thing I'll say, if I were to pat myself, that's absolutely, that's not the way I run a LOE. That's not the way. We had a saying, and it was a guy going through ground school years ago when we made the transition. And he said, and one day we were having a little in the ground school talking. He said, I used to come here to prove myself. Now I come to training here to improve myself.
That's good.
And we had a great culture at US Airways, particularly on the 190, with guys that were we were all marching to the same beat, relaxed. This, training is, you're never going to remove the stress, because at the end of the day, you got to perform. You got to meet the standard, right? No one is saying you're not going to meet the standard, but it goes a long way when you have a relaxed training environment and instructors that really know how to put people at ease. You can get a lot more out of them by just, being human and, joking around a little bit and, you don't have to be the stone face and go in there and just start flipping switches and failing stuff on people,
Yeah, I agree. I also think that I look back on my experience and I think I'm very thankful. I've done multiple iterations of AQP training. I've done multiple iterations of 121 training. I've done multiple iterations of military training. And AQP is just by far a better environment for learning and making yourself better.
If it's designed right now, based on what you told me, I would have to say that if I were the king, I would change a few things.
Well, there's always room for improvement. Yeah, the guy brought the intensity, and that was I feel like that's just the personality of that cat. The opportunity to succeed was just as even keeled as the guy that is really great, but it's just that personality that you bring into the cockpit is something that I think is important to consider if you are a check airman.
What I would do is in an 8-hour day, for ground school, an 8-hour training day, it would be more integrated. It would be more of a hybrid where we would do 4 hours of CBT and then go into the FTD and do procedures based on what we did in the CBT. Okay. And progressively, like if you have a whatever it is, a 10 or 12 day ground school footprint, you would do CPT for half and then IPT for the other half, and then working your way up into your SPV where we would do it as a crew. Some airlines do it as a crew. Some airlines do it individually. And then transition into the sim for your training and your MV, your spots, your loft, and your LOE.
Yeah, so kind of a see then do kind of thing. That's smart. There's so much room for advancement and improvement. And what I do like about AQP is that it gives the company the opportunity to help pilots succeed where the trends tell them that there needs to be focus. And that's a really, really good thing.
If I could wave my magic wand, the one thing that I would like to leave people with is utilize the instructional systems design methodology. Utilize all the tools that are available to you. Don't have those blinders on, looking through what I call the 121 prism. Use the instructional systems design. The objectives, the 3 M's: meaningful, memorable, for developing your training, and utilize all those benefits to make it a more successful training program. I mean, it's, we're getting away from the build the air. Did you find you had a lot of the build the airplane mentality?
Oh, no. That's all gone.
Yeah, as it should be. Now you're getting ready to go out there on the line, just think about in the old days, you'd have to, draw the electric system and what bus covers that. In the heat of the moment, when you have that Starling effect and you're not going to remember what bus is powered by what. When you're going over to Dublin on your first trip and you're up at 30 West and you're dreaming about having a bowl of seafood chowder and a pint of Guinness in one of Dublin's famous pubs, and the generator light comes on, right away it's going to be tunnel vision, right? My aircraft, what do we got? Call for the QRH, document solution, solve the problem, and that's it. Make sure someone's flying the airplane, solve the problem, and then make your decision. You're not going to recall from ground school what bus covers which. So we're totally getting away from that. We're focusing on flying the airplane, going to the checklist, identifying and neutralizing the problem, solving the problem, and then pressing on.
Yeah, somebody's got to fly, somebody's got to fix. And
401, no one's flying the airplane.
That's right. Well, Sam, we've been talking for over an hour, and I could talk for another hour because I feel like this is such a great conversation. I think AQP is so interesting. You also did a fantastic interview on the 21.5 show, which I will link in the show notes as well. That was maybe 2 years ago.
It was a while ago, yeah.
I remember I was driving to work at DFW when I listened to it. It was great. I'll never forget it. So, hey, thank you for spending time with us. Thanks for what you do for our community, because making us better, making us safer so we can come home to our families, that's what it's all about. So thank you for spending all your time, brother.
You're very welcome. It was a pleasure to be here, and, call anytime. And if anybody needs some, wants to get a hold of me and wants to talk, no problem. Got a lot of free time.
All right, pilots, that's the episode. I hope you've really enjoyed it. But before you go, do me a quick favor, subscribe to my show and leave me a review. Give me a 1-star review if it was totally worthless. Give me a 5-star review if it was the most amazing thing you've ever heard. I want to hear from you. So if you can give me a review, subscribe to the podcast, make yourself a little bit better, I will be happy. You'll be happy. We'll keep crushing. I cannot wait to see you on the next episode.